I'm James Doohan. In the next hour, we'll examine the controversial evidence and theories that suggest we're not alone in the universe. If these theories prove to be true, the implications are staggering. In recent times, there have been more reported UFO sightings than ever before. For centuries, these crafts have remained a mystery until now. The footage you're about to see is a startling photographic account that sheds light on the greatest question of our century. Are we really alone? In the past decade, over 15 million people have reportedly witnessed extraterrestrial craft. What's more remarkable is that contemporary science has ignored the evidence that for thousands of years has been in plain sight. Recently in Mexico City, millions of astonished onlookers watched as these and other craft hovered over their city for hours. It was the largest mass UFO sighting in history. Mexican officials even held press conferences asking the public to remain calm. What's more amazing is that these sightings are still occurring even today. In what may be one of the most revealing interviews of our time, nuclear physicist Bob Lazar speaks candidly about his top secret work at the government's saucer research facility known as Area S4. In 1989, he was hired by the military to back-engineer the propulsion system of an extraterrestrial craft.
Obviously, the ET craft do exist. Something had to build them, so there must be aliens. And since there are, and the craft are there must be some sort of factory and an entire civilization somewhere. And if in fact that is true, and it apparently is, then there must be others.
Contact cases are by far the rarest type of UFO sighting. In these instances, a ship or a number of ships are repeatedly sighted by a single witness over an extended period of time. Over the last several years, a Miami resident named Adrienne had what is now considered one of the best documented contact cases in history. At first, the sightings began occurring at some distance from his home, but it wasn't long before the craft began appearing over his backyard. This amazing video footage shows a glowing disc approximately 9 feet in diameter hovering just feet from his house. In a blink of an eye, the craft disappears. Once the footage is slowed down, we can clearly see the craft dematerialize frame by frame. Adrienne's contact case took place over a period of several years and was never reported to the authorities for fear of ridicule and reprisals. Among the numerous hours of footage taken, this sighting remains one of the most dramatic. It began at 10:03 p.m. on October the 20th, 1995, and took place over a 50-minute period. The encounter ended with Adrienne following the craft at high speeds down the freeway. Here we see the craft minutes after the sighting begins. This extraordinary footage has never been broadcast and is being shown here for the first time. Clearly, we can see the craft hovering silently over the homes below. These large crafts are commonly referred to as beam ships, or in some cases, motherships. They gained their reputation by their reported immense size and softly glowing light emitted by the craft's operation. Approximately 38 minutes into the sighting, the ship began hovering away from his house. He followed the craft in his car and stopped along the freeway to film it hovering near an apartment complex. Minutes later, the craft flew directly over Miami's International Airport, where it hovered momentarily. The ship then flew into a residential area and accelerated out of sight. As the craft emerged from a wooded field, he was able to continue videotaping, but it wasn't long before it began accelerating again. While pacing it at over 50 miles an hour, it flew off out of sight. This slow-motion enhancement clearly shows the craft as it's speeding along the shoreline. To this day, Adrienne maintains he is still experiencing the reoccurring sightings. Since then, they have frequently appeared in UFO sighting reports. This cigar-shaped craft was filmed hovering in Rhode Island in 1967. A similar elongated UFO was videotaped in 1980 in the skies over Hagen, Germany. These pictures of a cigar-shaped UFO were taken in California. This UFO was photographed in Earth's orbit. crowds gathered in Krasnodar, Russia, to marvel at this luminous cigar-shaped UFO. This dramatic footage was later broadcast on Soviet television. The evidence is overwhelming. No single program in history has ever amassed such a compelling collection of footage. We'll use computer analysis, optical enhancement, and expert testimony to help bring the truth to light. But first, when did these sightings begin? The evidence suggests that mankind has been visited since the dawn of time. Recently, researchers point to one undeniable event that sparked the largest wave of sightings in history: the detonation of the atomic bomb. Unknowingly, we had sent an invitation to the universe, establishing ourselves as an advanced civilization.
The Air Force has officially analyzed the motives of possible visitors from space. Here is a direct quotation from the official report.
Now, former government employee and nuclear physicist Bob Lazar breaks his silence. In this extraordinary interview, he discusses his classified work at the military's top secret saucer research facility known as S4. Bob Lazar is a nuclear physicist specializing in advanced propulsion systems. In 1989, he was hired by the military to back-engineer the propulsion system of an extraterrestrial craft. Lazar worked at what is undoubtedly the most top-secret research facility in the world, S4.
There was absolutely no ET craft, ET technology, anything like that at Area 51. This is why S4 was made specifically to separate it there. People at Area 51 do not have the clearance.
According to Lazar, the military had not been test-flying alien crafts at Area 51. Rather, the discs many had videotaped and photographed were actually being flown out of S4, just several miles away.
The S4 facility is an area just off the Papoose lake bed, dry lake bed, and it consists of 9 hangars. The hangars have sloped doors on them with a sand texture coating. At the time that I was working there at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas, there was a Special Projects EG&G building. When I was told to go to work, I drove there, parked my car there, got in a plane at the airport, flew to Groom Lake, where I deplaned and waited for a bus, and the bus drove me down to S4. The first disc I saw, I believe it was the second, or I think it was the third time I was up there. Upon seeing it, it struck me that, well, this explains all the UFO sightings. Not thinking that it was an extraterrestrial craft, that this must have been some advanced form of fighter that we've been working on for years, and, you know, people have just caught it being tested, so on and so forth. And it never even occurred to me, even though I was looking at an extraterrestrial vehicle, that, you know, this wasn't man-made. I give everything nicknames there. The one I worked on was kind of sleek looking, and I gave it the name the Sport Model. There was one that looked like a Jell-O mold. There was one that looked like a top hat. There was a disc that was turned up on its side, and it had a large projectile hole with the metal bent outwards on it. I can only surmise they were testing it to see if a projectile could penetrate it.
Alien crafts like the one Bob worked on had already been sighted throughout the world. But until Lazar entered the disc, he thought it was man-made.
It probably really hit me when I got inside the craft and looked around and began to understand how the craft was operated, and finally grasped the whole project as a whole, as what we were doing, the fact that we weren't building this thing, we were trying to find out how it was made. We were back engineering it. When I first got to look inside the craft, all I can say, it's an ominous feeling. You walk in there and it feels as if you shouldn't be there. I know that sounds kind of corny, but it's a real ominous feeling. It's not an exciting feeling. It brings up a whole lot of questions in your mind. I only witnessed one test flight up close, officially. That I was just inside the hangar. The craft lifted off the ground, virtually noiseless, other than a small corona discharge on the bottom of the craft, indicating the presence of high voltage. That dissipated at about 30 feet, and it stood there completely silently. And moved over to the left and to the right, and sat back down. That was the entire test. This was quite a scientific feat, to lift something completely silently, under control, and you know, perform a maneuver like that.
A bad feeling about this.
Facility. Lazar learned how these craft operate by studying their propulsion systems.
I had to hang upside down in there to see the lower level, essentially. And there were 3 large gravity amplifiers. These devices looked like about a 2-foot diameter, 4-foot long piece of pipe hanging by a smaller piece of pipe from the level above, and they can be independently positioned. And that's what emits the gravitational waves that propel the craft. They'll use one gravity generator to lift the craft off the ground. And as opposed to what we're used to, for instance, a plane, once it's in the air, we envision thrust or some force coming out the back of it to push it forward. The crafts work completely opposite of that. What they do is, once they're hovering in the air, they'll swing the gravity, or 2 remaining gravity generators, up in front of them and create a distortion, essentially a downhill, and the craft rolls downhill for infinity.
As seen here, these craft don't always fly in a similar fashion. They have been seen and photographed flying in radically different positions. Lazar explains.
There's what they call Omicron configuration, where the craft is using one generator, or Delta configuration, where it's utilizing all 3. Delta configuration would be for space travel. Essentially, the craft will tilt up on its side, focus the 3 gravity generators to a single point, and move through space that way. It's always chasing a little distortion. That's why they look goofy when they fly around at low speed. Gravity will vary somewhat, and you will get odd movements of the craft. So its low speed mode is kind of unstable for the most part.
Lazar was also able to shed light on one of the phenomenon that's commonly seen in so many sightings.
If you were going to see one of these crafts at night operating, it would appear really as a glowing ball, or just a bright light in the sky from a distance. Even close up, you know, you'd see a glowing halo around it. What you're dealing with is a high energy source in essentially a gas atmosphere, oxygen, nitrogen. And when you apply enough energy to a gas molecule, they emit photons, they emit light. Well, when you're on the outside, you know, you pretty much think, you know, how could they keep something like this secret? It's a crime against science, it's a crime against the people and all that. But, you know, your feelings change once you're privy to the information. Before I was at S4, I was more or less one of the guys that thought, you know, all these government conspiracy and UFO buffs and things like that were complete lunatics. Obviously, the ET craft do exist. Something had to build them, so there must be aliens. And since there are, and the craft are there, there must be some sort of factory and an entire civilization somewhere. And if in fact that is true, and it apparently is, then there must be others.
One of the least known aspects of the UFO phenomenon may be the most chilling. With today's sophisticated computer technology and special effects, it's possible to fake a picture or alter video. But this modern technology hasn't always existed. We've uncovered startling new evidence that suggests that mankind has been visited since the beginning of recorded history. This conference held on the subject, the mayor of Jalisco asked his citizens to remain calm as there were no reports of injuries or damages caused by the alien craft. In one of the more dramatic moments, this amateur video captured a metallic disc traveling through the clouds as it stopped in midair and reversed direction. No conventional aircraft can fly in this manner. UFO were even present during their Independence Day celebration. A military parade and a massive air show commemorated the occasion. As jets flew overhead, a metallic disc suddenly appeared. When the jets tried to intercept the craft, it accelerated, leaving them in its wake. In the last hour, we've shown you photographs, film clips, videotape, government files, and expert testimony documenting one of the greatest mysteries of our time. The evidence is overwhelming. From ancient artifacts to modern-day sightings, the evidence presents itself. Now, only you can decide. Are we really alone?
But the search for proof of extraterrestrial intelligence has produced disappointing results. The best so-called evidence has only been a few photographs and film clips. But now, all that's about to change. Since 1985, more than 15 million Americans have reportedly witnessed unidentified flying objects. But despite the seemingly overwhelming evidence, mainstream science has chosen to ignore the subject. But now, for the first time in history, one of the greatest mysteries of this century is unraveling. A former government scientist has come forward to discuss the military's classified work on extraterrestrial spacecraft. Human advances in technology have exploded in a million directions and show no signs of slowing down. The ever-increasing pace of achievement in the last several decades is unparalleled in human history. The high cost of developing and producing these technologies has limited the number of contenders from the private sector, leaving the government and large corporate businesses on the cutting edge of new discoveries. Always in the public eye, big business competes for high-paying contracts, working night and day to invent or further develop the next big thing to satisfy the masses. The government, on the other hand, must conceal information concerning national security that, for obvious reasons, should not be public knowledge. But when it comes to matters concerning the welfare of our planet, the living beings on it, or potential clues to the mysteries of the universe, many believe it should be our right to know. The end of World War II and the invention of the atomic bomb signaled a new era of international mistrust. Since the earliest days of the Cold War, which coincides with the Roswell incident and the start of the modern UFO era, the military has been especially secretive about its advances and achievements, while always searching for the perfect weapon or super sophisticated tool of espionage. High-tech surveillance equipment around the world, and even in space, has allowed global intelligence to see and be aware of many things that the common civilian cannot even begin to imagine. The military recruits many talented civilians when special expertise is required. And propulsion systems expert Bob Lazar claims he was one of them. In this exclusive interview, he gives his detailed account of his employment with the Department of Naval Intelligence at the top-secret facility known as S4, where, according to Bob, he was hired to work on recovered alien spacecraft. S4 is located 125 miles north of Las Vegas and 15 miles south of Groom Lake. This now not-so-secret military base at Groom Lake, Nevada, is known as Area 51, or Dreamland, as insiders like to call it. Born in 1959 in Coral Gables, Florida, Bob has lived much of his life in Las Vegas, Nevada. With degrees in physics and electronics from MIT and Caltech, he has dabbled in everything from chemistry to fireworks in an effort to understand the finer points of propulsion. He has even assembled a jet car with a 22,000 horsepower engine salvaged from a Navy F-3D Skynight that is capable of land speeds of over 350 miles per hour. Fate took a serious turn for Bob in 1982. Arriving early for a lecture at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico given by Dr. Edward Teller, one of the inventors of the atomic bomb, Bob was able to meet and talk to the famous physicist. Coincidentally, Dr. Teller was reading the local paper, The Monitor, with a featured front-page article on Bob, and the two struck up a conversation. Later, Bob sent Dr. Teller his resume for consideration, and soon after, Bob was hired by the Los Alamos National Laboratory. This Los Alamos-based directory lists Bob as an employee. By 1989, Bob was brought into the top-secret program at S4 known as Project Galileo. In the following interview, Bob reveals many details of this amazing experience. Did you witness any disk technology at Area 51?
No, there was no Absolutely no ET craft, ET technology, anything like that at Area 51. This is why S4 was made specifically to separate it there. People at Area 51 do not have the clearance.
How long were you employed at S4, and when were you hired?
When was I hired at S4? I guess early '89, and I was probably there only about 6 months or so, on a very infrequent basis.
How were you transported to and from work?
At the time that I was working there at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas, there was a Special Projects EG&G building. When I was told to go to work, I drove there, parked my car there, and got in a plane at the airport, flew to Groom Lake, where I deplaned and waited for a bus, and the bus drove me down to S4. The S4 facility is an area just off the Papoose lake bed, dry lake bed, and it consists of 9 hangars. The hangars have sloped doors on them with a sand texture coating. Around the opposite end of the hangars, there's the standard entrance where you're dropped off at, go through a security check, and inside there's a small complex. There is some office space, there's several laboratories, the hangars themselves, of course, and a few other places. I didn't have free rein to go wherever I wanted to. Everywhere I went to, I was essentially escorted, so that was really all about that I saw.
Inside the facility, what was the basic layout? Were there underground levels?
I don't think there were any underground levels to it, though there could have been. I don't think it was you know, an extensive underground facility. It just looked like an installation that was butt up against a mountain. And you know, I didn't see any evidence of any stairs going down, elevators, or but like I said, I don't know. There could have been, and I just might not have been permitted in those areas. Essentially, doesn't shield you, but essentially you're in, and this is a terrible way to say it, almost in a different realm, because you're now influenced only by that gravitational field. For instance, people wonder how a craft like this can make a turn at such high speed, a 90-degree turn, when they would imagine people slamming up against the wall or something to that effect. Well, that really wouldn't happen. Inertia would have no effect. You're in a distortion. And don't forget that gravity distorts time and space, so really nothing is going to influence you while you're in there.
Describe the gravity amplifiers for us and some of their different operating configurations.
There are 3 amplifiers. The craft can operate on a single one, can lift off the ground. The way in which it's propelled are 2 different ways. There's what they call Omicron configuration, where the craft is using 1 generator, or Delta configuration, where it's utilizing all 3. Delta configuration would be for space travel. Essentially, the craft will tilt up on its side, as opposed to a science fiction movie where you see a flying saucer moving around. The craft will tilt up on its side, focus the 3 gravity generators to a single point, and move through space that way. Moving around a source of gravity is a problem to a disk because it's interference, essentially. So what they do is they work with that interference to their benefit. They'll use 1 gravity generator to lift the craft off the ground. And as opposed to what we're used to, for instance, a plane, once it's in the air, we envision thrust or some force coming out the back of it to push it forward. The crafts work completely opposite of that. What they do is once they're hovering in the air, they'll swing the 2 remaining gravity generators up in front of them and create a distortion, essentially a downhill. And the craft rolls downhill for infinity. It's always chasing a little distortion. That's why they look goofy when they fly around at low speed, because they're essentially, and any time you run over, you know, the gravity field around the Earth is not completely constant and stable, depending on the minerals and density of the Earth underneath it. gravity will vary somewhat, and you will get odd movements of the craft. So its low-speed mode is kind of unstable for the most part. I only witnessed one test flight up close, officially. That I was just inside the hangar. The test was going off probably, just as the sun was going down, and it was a low-performance test. I believe there were some pilots or test pilots in the craft. The craft must have been retrofitted to fit them, because the seating arrangements were really not accommodating. They were in radio communication with the craft, which is kind of surprising to me, because the gravity waves that the craft was producing should have distorted the radio waves also. So apparently there's something there that I don't understand. The craft lifted off the ground, virtually noiseless, other than a small corona discharge on the bottom of the craft, indicating the presence of high voltage. That dissipated at about 30 feet, and it stood there completely silently, and moved over to the left, to the right, and sat back down. That was the entire test. However, that was an extremely impressive test. Maybe to someone that really knows little about science or anything, that wouldn't be a whole lot, but you have to realize this craft was about 52 feet in diameter. I don't know exactly how much it weighed, but it weighed a lot. And this was quite a scientific feat, to lift something completely silently, under control, and perform a maneuver like that. The craft itself was, I assume it was metal. It was cold to the touch, that's why I say it was metal, but it was a brushed aluminum, actually just an unfinished stainless steel, not shiny, finish to it. Had no seams. It was as if it was injection molded from one giant die. I was completely amazed. I can't really reflect on how it made me feel, but that was exciting.
How would you define gravity? Could you describe in layman's terms its basic principles for us?
Gravity is something difficult to explain, because it's something that we essentially don't understand. It's just something that we can observe. Not much is really known about gravity. There are many theories about it, but they are just mainly theories. There's theories of gravitons, which allege that these are these subatomic particles that act like an attractive force like gravity, that exchange between two pieces of matter. There is also a theory that gravity is a form of wave, an electromagnetic wave. But basically, gravity is a force. It's the attraction. It's the inherent property of matter to have gravity, a mutual attraction for each other, and it's basically all that we really know. Modern science, current science, right now, identifies one gravity. It's one force in nature. Apparently, through research at S4 or information gained from one of the crafts they were researching there, it appears that there are two different forms of gravity. One form works on an atomic scale, on subatomic particles, holding pieces of matter, holding atoms themselves together. Another works on a larger scale, the scale we're most familiar with, holding planets in orbit, holding ourselves to the ground, things of that sort. Because it produces a gravitational field, I wouldn't say the craft is invisible during the day. However, if you're under the craft, because of the way the gravity is being used, gravity bends time and space, and it bends light. If you are looking underneath the craft or from certain vantage points, you will actually see what's above the craft. It's really a trick of the way light bends under the influence of gravity. For instance, we can see stars that are behind the sun, that are blocked from our view by the sun. The reason we can see them is because the sun is a tremendous gravitational field, and it's bending the light around it where we can see the star. Space-time and gravity are all essentially interrelated. They all act on one another. Gravity bends space. Gravity also distorts time. When you vary one, you essentially vary the other two. If you As an example, if you have a massive body, say a planet or something that's making a lot of gravity, producing a lot of gravitational waves, if you will, it distorts space, it bends space to it. It also slows down time. These things aren't theories, we know them to be true. We cannot artificially create this because we can't create gravity. But this is how they're all interrelated. Just a couple of them are the fact that as your speed increases, so does your mass proportionally. In other words, the more energy you put in to go faster begins to slow you down by the fact that it's converted into mass. You have other problems like just traveling at such an extreme velocity, navigational problems, the fact that you might run into little tiny micrometeorites at speeds like this. They would undoubtedly destroy your craft. There's just a whole host of problems that you're going to run into just attempting to do something like that. Aside from the fact the amount of energy required to accelerate to the speed of light is horrendous.
Could you briefly describe Project Looking Glass and Project Sidekick for us?
Project Sidekick was another project going on with Galileo. Galileo was the project that I was involved in. Sidekick dealt with any of the weapon potential of the craft, whether or not the craft had a weapon in it or could it be used as a weapon, but it had something to do with some sort of particle beam configuration where the gravity generator can be used as a lens to focus a weapon of some sort, similar to the SDI device we were working on in the 80s, but with the potential of a focusing device using the gravity generator.
And Project Looking Glass?
Project Looking Glass dealt with the distortion, the fact that there's a time distortion, essentially looking back in time, and by that I do not mean looking back years ago to see the wagon train days. They're looking for distortions that are milliseconds in time, and what that was used for, I don't know, but that was just observing the time, the time distortion, time dilation phenomena of the craft in operation.
What is element 115? Is it found here on Earth, or is it strictly an extraterrestrial material?
115 is strictly an extraterrestrial material. It probably occurs naturally in some other places, maybe other star systems. Some people not familiar with science or chemistry say, well, that's ridiculous, all the elements occur on Earth, you know. But that's not true. There are elements on the periodic chart that aren't found on Earth. I believe the Heavy Ion Research Lab in Darmstadt, Germany, has reached element 112 recently. So 115 isn't that far away. And when they synthesize it, it's not like they're making a couple ounces of it. They're talking about 1 or 2 atoms of it. To make any usable quantity of a heavy element like that is virtually impossible. Element 115 is in the top of the reactor. And the base of the reactor apparently is a small, something similar to a cyclotron. It's a particle accelerator. A particle is accelerated to high speed and then deflected up a small tube, and it's aimed at the 115. This transmutes the 115, similar to the way we do that in a normal particle accelerator. This causes a reaction, a radiation emission that we really haven't seen before. It produces antimatter. This antimatter is guided down a tuned tube and reacts with a gas. When matter and antimatter react, they convert to 100% energy. This energy is converted, heat energy, is converted to electrical power in the reactor itself. This is done through a thermoelectric converter. And this electrical power is used to power other subsystems on the craft, though there is no wiring, you know, as we would know it. Also, that's almost a byproduct of the reactor. The reactor also sets up a gravitational wave from the 115 being bombarded. This gravitational wave is present at the top of the reactor and is essentially guided in the same way microwaves are guided, through tuned tubes. And this goes to their amplifying cavities and through the projectors that are in the bottom of the craft.
With the gravity generators running, is there thermal radiation danger to the crew?
There is no thermal radiation while the reactor is running. The thermionic generator is 100% efficient, which is in violation of the first law of thermodynamics. But in fact, it works. Element 115 is stable. And for those familiar with chemistry, we know that elements with higher atomic numbers have shorter and shorter half-lives. However, when you reach a certain point, they call it the island of stability. There is a place, and we've theorized this for a long time. Somewhere around 114 to 116, there should be an area in there where the nucleus of the atom is geometrically stable with protons and neutrons, where it no longer decays. It's not radioactive. 115 is, in fact, this element. In fact, it does occur again somewhere around element 247. Of course, we're nowhere near synthesizing that. We can only, predict things like that. But that's where 115 is. I was looking for the video camera or something to that effect, but I missed some of the most impressive maneuvers. But the craft was similar to what was done before that I had seen close up, other than the fact that it went above the mountain range, moved a much greater distance at a much higher rate of speed.
How were you able to find out about the test flight schedules?
The test flight schedules were told to me specifically because I was probably going to have to be present during those times. And at that time, the test flights were taking place on Wednesday nights. And from what they said, that was because that was statistically the least amount of traffic in the area. And that's all that they were concerned about.
Does the propulsion system release any sort of discharge or exhaust?
There was a high voltage discharge on the bottom of the craft, but as far as there being an exhaust, there was none.
Why do they appear as glowing balls of light in the night sky?
Well, that's kind of the same reason why a neon light or a fluorescent light lights up. What you're dealing with is a high energy source in essentially a gas atmosphere, oxygen, nitrogen. And when you apply enough energy to a gas molecule, they emit photons, they emit light. And I don't think it's anything, it's really a byproduct of how the craft operates. When it's emitting that much energy, the gas surrounding the craft emits light, the same reason why lightning is visible. You have a huge electrical discharge, and the gas emits light in the form of lightning bolt. If you were going to see one of these crafts at night operating, it would appear really as a glowing ball or just a bright light in the sky from a distance. Even close up, you'd see a glowing halo around it. This is typically what you'd see in your normal UFO sighting, if you've heard them a lot. However, keep in mind that lights in the sky are caused by much more common things than flying saucers.
Tell us a little more about the aurora you witnessed taking off out of Area 51.
It was a large craft, and the one glimpse I got of it was from the rear, and it had two huge square exhausts with vanes in them. And it was just, it sounded more like a rocket than a jet. I don't know. I even think he did mention that it was liquid methane powered, but there again, working on the disk technology, I really could care less what was rolling around at Area 51, but it did catch my eye.
As a result of going public, have there been any attempts made on your life?
One day when I was getting on Interstate 15, driving down Charleston Boulevard, a car came up alongside of me, and I thought he was just trying to race me to get on the freeway. This was after I had left the project. It was a white, boxy-looking car. Exactly what make and model, I don't know. But I accelerated to get on the freeway to go fast, and there was a gunshot, and the back of the car was hit, and I skidded off into the median. And I stopped, and I was frightened, and I just stood there because I thought the guy was going to be alongside of me and just shoot me. I had nothing to do. I was essentially paralyzed with fear, and I waited there, and then nothing else happened. And Do I know it was a government agent trying to kill me? No. Could it have been a drive-by shooting? Maybe. You know, so I mean, it was an attempt on my life, but by who specifically, I don't know. Though I was threatened before I had left, that they threatened my wife's life and my life, so I can only put two and two together and say that they were kind of pissed at me.
In an earlier interview, you had mentioned that they had put a gun to your head. Tell us about that.
That was after we were caught out when I had the test flight schedule, and I brought some friends out to show them the disc test. We got caught out there, and the following day I was debriefed down at Indian Springs Air Force Base, and I was in the room with the security guards that caught us, my supervisor and some other people, and some other security personnel. Yeah, they were essentially grilling me about security and, you know, how could I possibly bring people out there, and I guess I wasn't as responsive as they would like, and they got in my face, and one of them pulled a sidearm out, you know, just pushed it against me.
Have you maintained any contacts with your colleagues out at S4?
For the place, so it's kind of a done deal. As far as whether or not there were any craft out there, I believe, you know, they were out and gone in probably the late '89, early '90, and the only thing people see now out there are, you know, either flares or planes coming into land, but that's about it.
Did you have an interest in flying saucers or science fiction in general as a child?
I was never interested in flying saucers as a child. Science fiction, you know, I watched Star Trek, I guess, with everyone else back then, but for the most part, yeah, I didn't even believe in flying saucers up until I was employed at S4.
But this amazing, flying, structured craft has no earthly explanation. It was seen over the small farming village of Kibbutz Hatzor for 3 consecutive nights in August of 1996. This video, shot by a young resident of the kibbutz, shows a bizarre-looking, partially lit craft with strange red markings and rectangular shapes. When the camera zooms in, we see what appears to be a light on the craft's left side take on amazing structure. The structure, some say, resembles a huge flying building with hallways. 17-year-old Amiche Shoah was stunned to be awakened by the strange, bright object in the night sky. He watched in amazement as it hovered above for hours. He waited for its return the next night, video camera in hand. By the third night, word of the strange craft had spread, and some 60 members of the kibbutz came out to see it in all its glorious color. This time, Amiche's batteries failed, but he managed to film the odd craft again using a neighbor's camera. Look what he managed to capture on tape. The structure is so massive that the illuminated portion is said to represent only 5 to 7% of its actual size. Is this the design of some otherworldly architect? As incredible as it sounds, some UFO researchers claim it could be housing alien inhabitants, giant aliens as described in the Bible.